to introduce the MAST methodology, which is an operational framework for implementing and maintaining good practice metadata governance. So just a little bio and background on Heather and Sam. Heather is the manager of data governance section at ACMA. She has 10+ years experience in government data governance and data strategy. Her key responsibilities are the lead data governance initiatives, building data capability, and communicating benefits of data governance. Samuel Spencer is the Chief Executive Officer and the co-founder of Aristotle Metadata. He also has 10+ years experience in data governance and data literacy education. His key responsibilities in his role are new product development, sales and marketing, strategy development, and staff training and development. And there's also many more people in the community starting to implement this MAST methodology. So I'll hand over to Heather and Sam to take over from here.
Thanks everyone for coming along. So one of the reasons we came up with this MAST methodology is because, as Laura mentioned, we both have spent a lot of time working in this industry as professionals for 20 years between us combined, across around 15 different government and a few private sector agencies. And I think it's indisputable, and everyone listening will know, documenting data, capturing your metadata is really essential. And having well-defined and well-described data is your ideal state. But what we've seen in our experience is in some business areas within organizations do this really well, and some don't. Some organizations manage to do it on a whole really well, and others still have those, cylinders of excellence, and other areas, are struggling to catch up. So what we wanted to look at is, what are the commonalities across these successful business areas? Why do some succeed and why do some struggle to get traction? What are the commonalities across these successful data documentation initiatives? And how could we ensure more business areas and more agencies are also achieving success? We know that documentation can appear to be resource intensive and time consuming, and the return on investment isn't always immediately evident. And the data is captured and used without documentation. So sometimes you get that argument of, well, why do we need to do this anyway? We're using the data without the documentation. We have found that stakeholders can be really reluctant to change their processes. And it's so overwhelming when you look at your legacy systems and decades of data and you go, well, where do I even start with that? And that's what's brought us to MAST.
So everybody's done a slide like this. Everybody in the data community has tried to put this principle in front of people and say, metadata is important. We put a row of data on a slide and say, we can't understand this. And we show them a bunch of headers and say, this improves the ability for me to understand what this data is. I know that this is about a person, it's about their marital status, it's about their offspring. It's about building that understanding and saying, this is important. And this is the first principle in what we've seen around this methodology is this is a critical part of success. We need to get organizations to really deeply understand that metadata is the key critical capability in generating value from data. Once we can get people past this threshold, we'll have this understanding within the organization. This is an activity that is important.
So the next principle is starts with A, but it's really about people, because people are at the heart of data governance. And good metadata is created by people, not by tools, not by AI or ML, scraping your systems to draw information out. It's about people analyzing those business processes and the data to understand what it means. And the documentation of that data then improves the data quality, and it ensures the consistent and accurate capture of data, the magical quality at the source that we all want to get to. Documentation is also a really important part of risk management. It's only through analyzing the business processes and the data that you can understand how to manage the risks of your data. You make sure it's transparent and defensible, and we know how the data it can be accessed and how it can be used.
Me?
Yep.
Sure. Once we've got that point of getting people involved, we need to understand what the role of data governance is. Again, based on the efforts that we've seen, it turns data governance from an area that does to an area that supports across the organization. We talk about the data deluge. People are producing assets at a phenomenal rate. People are producing more and more data than ever before. The traditional aspect of hoping and relying that data governance areas will keep up no longer fits. We need to start operating in an environment of peer review. How do we facilitate data governance areas assisting people improve business quality or data quality in business areas rather than doing it themselves? The critical change here is understanding that data governance is about improving adoption outside of their sections and increasing capability across the organization rather than holding it within.
Which brings us to my favorite principle in this one. Successful data governance programs come from collaboration with teams to deliver outcomes. And that's not just the data policy or the data governance team. That's working across your organization, working with your data stewards, your business areas, your custodians, your owners, whatever you want to call them. You have to do this as a collaborative, combined effort.
And that's the MAST Manifesto. We chose Manifesto for a really good reason. Like, this is what the Agile Manifesto is built on. And we've tried to mimic that kind of ability for organizations to adopt this. This is a core set of beliefs that are important. We put these in front of organizations and say, these are things that we hold are important to getting value out of our data. If we can build this understanding and say, understanding our metadata, understanding the importance of analysis, not just technology, understanding the ability for us to generate support for this, and the ability for us to build resources and build teams to manage that support is critical. If this feels obvious, it should. Every time we've workshopped this with our own areas, with our business areas, with our clients, the feedback has been, this makes sense. So if the feedback is, duh, that's good. Because what we want to do is, as a data management community, build that shared belief. As soon as we gave this a name, people started treating it with seriousness. It went from being a form of practice to best practice. It became things that people could hang on to. These are things that we need to do.
It's really important to note, though, that this isn't a project methodology. There is enough of those out there. We've got, Agiles and Six Sigmas and God knows what else. That's not what this is. Let's keep that to the PMs and their expertise. This is a framework for achieving success in data documentation projects. But as we've said, doing MAST well requires a team to support it. And it doesn't need a dedicated team. You don't need to go back to your agencies or your organizations and say, oh, we need a MAST, we need all these people. It can be part of the capability of the existing data governance, data policy, data management teams working in collaboration with business areas. MAST is also really pragmatic and fit for purpose. It's based on slow and continued progress to deliver programs, rather than these, big bang approaches that we have seen so many times just not deliver what they're promising. And finally, really importantly too, MAST helps resolve some of those data management wicked problems that we all struggle with. How do we get quality at the source? How do we get shared understanding of the data, that shared meeting? How can we make our data interoperable so it can be shared? These are all the things we want to achieve with our data. And we really believe that MAST is a really great way of achieving those.
And this is the way we do it. This is the terminology that we've been using in our own areas to try and build an understanding of what do I do? We get given this problem of we need to document so much stuff. We're going to do a whole of business transformation. We're going to focus on massive amounts of legacy information. And we hit this point of choice paralysis. When you have everything to do, it becomes very difficult to know where to start. And from that, we've built what we call the IDEAL framework. What it is it's a process and a repeatable process and a cycle of activities that we can do inside of our organization. Again, it's not a project management system, it's operational. There are people now starting to use this process who will end their careers following this cycle, continuously to help improve management across the life cycle within these organizations. And it's progressive. It focuses on doing one step at a time. One of the most valuable things that we've talked through with our own clients is using this as an avenue to stop them from doing activities. don't do too much too quickly is one of the core principles around this. So what we're going to do is we're going to break every one of these down to understand what we're going to do and not do as part of this within our organizations.
So the first one, which is one I have spent a lot of time considering and building in my own practice, is the idea of investigating and inventorying your data and your information assets. The goal of this is to increase the knowledge of the existence and of your data assets and their locations, because you can't manage it if you don't know it exists. The most important action behind this one is just write something down, because some documentation is better than no documentation at all. But in doing this, and people can get very carried away with inventorying everything, and that's great, you've got to balance a comprehensive inventory with what's achievable for the context and maturity of the organization that you're in, or even with the business area that you're working in. We don't always need to think of whole organizations. You can always think in terms of working with business areas. You need to focus on the assets that have value and interest to your organization, particularly when you're facing decades of legacy data that needs to be examined and understood. And don't go too deep too quick. You don't need to know everything straight away. This is a cycle. You can go back and refine. So if you're at that foundational stage, simply begin by documenting what you can find and get any information down, and then refine it later. Look for content that already exists within your organizations that your business areas manage to support this documentation. I am sure they're knowing government, they're littered across websites, there are methodology papers, there are data collection forms or acquisition forms. I know for a fact that many of our data definitions are defined within legislation, and there are a lot of key metrics that different government agencies or even other sectors report on. Look to those things to give information about what your data is. You can also just capture the information in Excel. Really strongly encourage you to not think you need to buy something straight away. Excel isn't perfect, but it works when you're just at this stage. And another really important bit is to communicate why inventorying your data is important. It's the first step towards the transparency and accountability and usability of your data. It's obvious to us, but it's not always obvious to the really busy people we're going to, saying, hey, we're going to make you do a little bit more work now and you're going to write down your stuff. They have to see the value, and we have to communicate that.
But as you're successful, and you will be successful if you do this, I guarantee it. But if you do this, you will find that there will be challenges along the way. Like, as we do more and more inventory activity, we will find more and more data assets that need to be managed in more and more ways. And you will find that areas will try and tweak it. You know, the ONDC 26 will become a little bit different in this area. What we saw was a standard across the organization becomes a little bit different. And we'll start to see that challenge of people wanting to break a little bit out of this. We need to keep them focused. And over time, as we build more content, we need to focus on discovery. A really well-developed data asset management system will allow us to find information faster. It's not about full structure. Names and definitions and paragraphs of descriptions of what this asset is highly valuable from a discovery perspective. So focusing on discovery is important. Implementing standards over time, again, builds that consistency across the organization. There are many frameworks out there, not just Aristotle, but others that allow us to do this. We talk about data sets, we talk about indicators, we talk about classifications. How do we manage these high-level data assets that are important for the organization? And then lastly, as Heather said, we can start tomorrow. You can do this tomorrow in an Excel spreadsheet. And that becomes a really valuable way for us to speed up adoption. Once we get that volume, good systems will allow us to import that in so that we can quickly demonstrate value when we move from, you know, a traditional office environment to an online system. Eventually, though, people will ask, what next? This is where, again, we want to be very careful about moving to the next step. Once we've got our inventories in place, that becomes a checklist for what do we want to document most? Like, we've got our inventory, so what do we want to focus on? And this is where the big goal here comes to increasing our understanding of that data, not just at an asset level, but further down. The key thing here is to focus on documentation as is. One of the key pitfalls that I had when working with clients was this desire to improve definitions, to try and make everything the same. And we found that that was a failure point. Documenting what business areas tell you their data means, as unintuitive or intuitive as that may sound, becomes really important. They told you what it means, document that first, even if it doesn't fit in with the rest of the organization, because that's really important to getting their adoption. They know their terminology, keeping it the same, bringing it in becomes really, really important. So document as is so that they know they can control their information, because at this stage it is their information.
So you're going to start this tomorrow, and you're going to see a pattern here. I'm going to be the start tomorrow girl. You can capture data dictionaries or business glossaries in machine readable formats such as Excel, and that's preferable to Word because you can actually start controlling your fields then and filtering. But again, documenting something somewhere is better than nothing. If you can, it's great to adopt existing standards, and they should be existing ones. Try not to make up your own where possible, because existing standards are maintained by people other than yourself, and that's also a benefit. And also, it's really important to document the conceptual information about your data, not just, or in addition to where it's stored or how it might be structured. The conceptual part aids that understanding of what the data means. And as we get further through the IDEAL process, that's really important information to have. Another thing you can do if you're starting and not kind of sure how to go about this, go back to the teamwork principle. Ask your peers what they're doing. Go to other agencies and organizations. Ask them if they've got templates you can borrow. Learn from others. People are truly at the heart of data governance.
And as this goes over time, as we implement this, as we go through repeated cycles, we will again start to see a number of challenges that we can surmount. We will get more and more content, and it will become more and more difficult to manage over time when we do it in a traditional way. The problem with the SharePoint list or the shared drive with a bunch of documents in becomes a challenge when it comes to administrating this information and controlling access. The other thing is, again, we're going to try and fight against areas introducing their own methods, not because they don't know what they're doing, but again, the goal of this is to build consistency over time. Use those templates to help them document information. As we again continue through this, there is a problem of scale, and that's where I come in, that's my bit, is using existing standards becomes really, really valuable. What we've seen is through the areas that we work with, adoption of standards like ISO 11179 becomes really useful as a way for us to build a common framework for talking about data. What are you working on? How do you use it? How do you store it? Becomes really important. Coalescing on those common terminologies becomes vital to driving that adoption and driving that communication across business sectors and across organizations. The other thing is focusing on those concepts. There's a lot of information that we need to manage about data that isn't data. What do our codes mean? Who's authorized this information is something we'll see next, but what do those terms mean and what are the meanings of those codes? Lastly, we want to focus on, where possible, referencing re-existing standards. If people have developed standards we can use around, marital status, around children, around, patients, reusing those where possible, where they exist, becomes important for building that consistency, but shouldn't be a key focus at this stage.
So you've inventoried, you've documented, everything's written down. So what do? You don't lock it in a file somewhere and forget about it. You don't hand it over to a business area if you've been helping them and go, here you go, done it for you. Best of luck. You have to share this information and you have to communicate it. That's part of the publication bit. You also have to get some level of agreement with it too. So the goal of this is to get that increased buy-in from the stakeholders through the shared understanding of the data. And again, share the documentation with others. Record how you have agreed that these are the definitions that they are now. Working with people, teamwork. It's going to be the repeated theme from me. Don't let the documentation become stagnant or forgotten though, because you will have just wasted an awful lot of time and heartache. You have to keep building and enriching this. And you also need to build trust in the data by describing who has improved these definitions or the publications of the assets. So it's not just, I did it because I thought so. This was me. Have some transparency around process. Building trust is so important too. So again, how do we begin? You can agree that this is what the data means in your context right now. Sam said before, don't try and start harmonizing yet. Don't try and start refining your concepts just now. Just agree that for right now, in my context, even if it's siloed, this is what my data means. Communicate that and share it with others. And be comfortable sharing these definitions, even if they're not perfect, even if you made it up on the spot, it doesn't matter. Sharing it helps to get the ideas out there and to help improve over time.
But again, this is an area where data governance does become really important. And this is an area where that support focus is, again, really important. Endorsement and publication is one of those key areas that our traditional data governance areas can do best at. Drive the adoption out, help people build that quality up. The challenge that we're going to be focusing on is there's going to be more and more content coming through. As we successfully go through this process, we're now at a phase where business areas are coming to us with their own terminologies. They're trying to do more. They've seen how this process can work because we've built on these earlier stages. What we want to focus on here is that peer review process. How do we operationalize the idea of peer review? We have a realm of expertise in the data governance and the data management space that knows these principles. Rather than taking this on, how do we adopt systems that allow us to push some of that knowledge back out? How do we adopt these systems that we've seen in a lot of other areas, in our JIRAs, in our Confluences, in our Aristotles, that allow us to say, this is what I think is ready for publication. Can you help? And how do we do that in a way that we can capture all of those decisions in a single unified way? Because it's not only about the data, it's not about the metadata, but it's also all about those approvals. How did we go through that process? Because in 3 to 5 years' time, when we go back and say, why did we call it this? Why did we, publish this term? That's where that becomes really vital. The other thing is understanding the need for privacy in certain instances. Sometimes there is sensitive information. Sometimes it's too early to put out. Again, what we want to do is focus on ways that we can build a publication platform around this. How do we share it with the right people in the right ways? That may be internal audiences, it may be external audiences, it may be small groups. How do we build that so that we've got trust that the system does what we need it to do? Okay, we've been successful. And this is the key thing that we always try and focus on. How do we build a consistent single source of truth of consistent terminology? We've identified all of our data assets. We've found the things that are most important. We've documented these. We've endorsed them. So now there's this visibility across the organization. We hold this to last because, again, we want to see more and more terms and more understanding about who's done what and why. This is the point where we can start doing that harmonization process and going, we've now got 5 to 10 different or similar definitions for the same concept. How do we harmonize this? How do we bring this into a consistency where possible? What we want to do here is focus on this idea of healthy debate. How do we get people to talk about their terminologies? Because some of these differences are important. Some of these differences are there for business purpose reasons, for historical reasons. We want to get that understanding as early as possible so that we can start talking about it. Maybe we can bring them together, maybe we can't, but this is where we can build consensus and documentation about why these terms are different. But don't force agreement. It's not about telling people what to do. That just stifles adoption. Again, this is something that we've seen time and time again, where areas will insist, my definition of a person or a patient or a client is different to yours. If we tell them no, if we force them to use the same terminology, they will back away from the table. 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 well-documented but similar terms is better than trying to force people into agreement, because this is what drives adoption. Only harmonize what we can get agreement on.
So a really good way to start this process is taking some of your definitions and your data to your users and saying, how do you understand this? This is what I think my data means. Does it mean the same thing to you? Users, and creators of data often have very different perspectives. And this is where that healthy debate can really help inform and shape what your data should mean and helps you to harmonize. And again, share and discuss your documentation with the stakeholders. The only way you can start to understand the meaning behind the data and how it should be used is if you talk about it with people. It's also really good to try and find the common concepts, and everybody has them. There's a handful of things that, you know, everyone across your organization deals with. It doesn't have to be a concept like, you know, patient or, you know, marital status. It could be the way you're collecting geospatial information. My geospatial is back. You know, how many different ways do we need to collect the Australian states and territories? You know, let's see if we can start with something small and easy. Easier said than done. It's probably not that easy. But if you start with the easy wins, you can show the value and then you can build on from there.
Once we've started to get to this point, again, this is where we start, where scalability becomes really important. Now we're talking about reams of information being brought into systems that need to control this. This may be bespoke systems, it may be systems that have been bought in and built in, but we need to make sure that we've got a process for finding information across these large volumes. How do we find these common terms? And how do we harmonize in a way that ensures we keep good audit trails about what's happened? And that auditability is key. Knowing when and why certain things were done is critical to understanding when and who we should be engaging with to bring these terms together. If we know who's brought in these 6 or 7 different definitions of state, we know who to talk to and who's still in the organization, who's moved, who's changed, to know how we're going to build this common terminology. We need to make bulk merging of these references easy to do. Again, this is something that we've focused on very heavily because it's really critical. When we start building, again, large-scale volumes of metadata across organizations, when we start, doing that change and moving from 6 definitions to 1, how do our systems help us do that relinkage? Find all of those harmonized terms, update them so they're all pointing to one consistent terminology, and manage that life cycle so we know that things are being archived. And then lastly, having the ability to extract information in a way that we can process and handle becomes really important. Excel is a really great way. It's really fantastic for us to do that data analytics, for us to do that analysis on this information, and being able to use that as a crosswalk into and out of complex systems becomes really important for us to be able to perform this second last step.
The last step in some ways is also kind of the first step, because leadership is really important. And having a long-term strategy is really, really essential as well, because this is cyclical. And this is probably my favorite of all the letters in IDEAL. The goal of this is to increase the knowledge retention of your data and improve capability over time. You get quality at the source through the documentation of your data. This is about behavior change, showing the value and guiding people into new processes. What you need to do is land and expand, or grow the maturity or the capability, or any buzzwords that you like. You need to ensure the maintenance of these definitions over time. But don't assume that leadership is something somebody else can do. As data governance or data policy teams, you have leadership handed to you on a platter. That's kind of why you're there, to enable your organization to build its data capabilities through the well-managed and well-governed data. So you can be the leader. But really importantly, you don't need to change the world straight away. Start small, show value, and build out from there. Engage with those areas that want to change first. That way you're making your job so much easier because you're not facing barriers straight away. They're engaged, they're interested. Go for them. So find those opportunities with interested business areas. And sometimes you can find that through looking at your corporate strategy or your business plan. Where does your organization want to focus its attention this year or over the next 3 years? Are there any big transformation projects happening where they're redesigning data acquisition systems? Or have you just got someone who wants to do something more with their data and they're keen on doing some visualizations? I mean, this is where we're at ACMA. We've got a bunch of data action projects. They're our teams primed for this because they want to do more with their data. and they're resourced to be doing that, and we are there to support them. That's where you go first, with those golden opportunities, not for the people who don't want to see your face ever again or who ignore your calls. Start with the easy wins, show value and build out over time, and continue to grow that, continue to promote that value proposition of why you're doing this and why it's important for your agency. I can't stress that enough. We need to show the value and the benefits of this. And by having those small wins, you show the value and then you grow the adoption beyond just the people who are really keen to get started with you.
And yeah, like that whole like land and expand idea is something that we've seen again, time and time again with the adoption of Aristotle. 5 users becomes 10 users, becomes 20 users, becomes 100 users, becomes 1,000 users in some cases. Like there are agencies out there who have been able to, over the last 4 to 5 years, build out teams of, hundreds of people who are managing this information for them. People are seeking to be engaged. They do want to be doing this. We just need to do it in a way that facilitates their access to this information. There are 2 key things that we have seen again come up when it comes to data governance, and people will ask 2 questions. This is a great idea, but what systems, not just software, but what processes and controls are we putting in place to make this happen? And then secondly, what are we going to do in future? The second this starts to look successful, they will start to talk about next year and the year after and the ongoing management of this, because people do care. Like people do care about their data. They may not know what they're doing, but they want to know that what they're doing has purpose. Giving them a clear roadmap forward becomes really important to delivering on these goals. And the 2 things that I would say are like make onboarding easy. How do you bring users into these systems? How do we do it in a seamless way and show them what they need to know? What hand-holding is there around, what help are we putting in front of them? What support, what teams, what task cards are we putting in front of them so they know what they can do? What examples are we giving them so they know what good practice is, so they have something to follow? All of us through our learning life cycles have looked at an example and used that to copy from. We grab a template, we change some words. We look at an example online and we tweak it. It's what we do. It's how we learn. And giving people those examples that they can use and clone and copy becomes really important. And the second thing is we really need to focus on building an operational budget for this. And it sounds quite like high level. It sounds quite strategic, but we need to figure out a way as a data management community to build this into the operational budget. Like data is important, value is important, being able to use this information over the long term is important. Putting this as a consistent line item and using common buzzwords, using the terms that we see online. We know we need to move to cloud. We know that we need to improve this. We know we need to have an operational way to support this moving forward. Becomes a really good avenue for us to talk through this with our leadership to get change happening. So, this is what it looks like on a page, and we've put it on a page for everybody in the audience, and we're going to be sending out like a really nice printout for everybody online, along with a copy of the slides. The best thing you can tell us today is this feels obvious. It felt obvious to us when we started documenting it, but again, the key thing is building a consistent way that we're going to do this. Like we know that data management is important, but what we've seen in our own organizations is giving it a name, giving it a process, and giving it a cycle gives people to hold on to, something to hold on to. The success that I've had telling people that we're not going to do A, like I've had this exact sentence, I love the sentence, we're not going to do A because we're not ready yet. We haven't got enough stuff to A. I don't even say audit with people now. We just say we're not ready to A. We need to focus on I and D first. We want to identify, inventory, and document. That's the process that we're at right now. It builds an understanding and they know what's happening next. It's been really positive to see what people have said about this. And again, I really hope to hear that's obvious. But if you have comments, I think that's why we're here. But again, this becomes a tool that we can use to talk within our organizations and say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. And this is what we're going to do next.
So to close, the MAST methodology is a toolkit we can use to focus on the value-added activities in the data governance and management life cycle. if I can give you one piece of advice today, and this is one of my 2 data mantras, just write it down and then tell people where it is. It's really simple. And Sam and I have been saying this to each other for the 12 years that we've known each other. Just write it down. You don't need to be perfect, and you don't need to know everything about your data straight away. Start small and grow, show that value, and just start somewhere, and whatever makes sense for your business or your context. What I'm doing at ACMA is following this, but where I'm starting might not be where you need to start. You need to understand your organization, its context, its drivers, its needs, and start there. But you have to start somewhere. Don't feel overwhelmed by those hundreds of legacy systems and the decades of data, because you can get to it if you just start somewhere.
I think that's it. We didn't really practice it.
The end.
Yeah. So really, the reason for this is because we've seen this work. Like, we've seen this as a toolkit that is valuable. We're going to be publishing more and more information about this, and we see that this has value for our clients. But what we want to learn is this terminology going to work for data management? Is this going to work for us to build that consensus? So I'd like to open the floor to questions online or in the audience to understand, how did we develop it? Why do we think this is appropriate? Why did we pick the steps we did? How do we stop people from going too fast, too soon? Like, this is the point where I'd like to open it to the floor and say, what do you want to know? Or,
I'd like to know, in the size of the organizations that you've used this in, and, you know, in a resource constrained environment, how many resources do you actually take to achieve something, even if it was just a small room to show value?
I might start. So the question was, in what size organizations have we tested this methodology? What was the resourcing behind it, and what investment did it need to show win? So I have been doing flavors of this across a number of organizations. I guess where this has really come to life is in my current role at ACMA, and we're an organization of about 450 people, I think, in 3 offices in different places. So we're not all even all in the same place. And sometimes that matters. I have built the governance capability at ACMA from myself to an APS 5, for people who understand the APS things, to now a team of 3, me, an EL1 and an APS 5. We can't achieve very much. And so that's why we really need to see where we can get those quick wins. And so we've looked to what our data strategy is for the agency. Where does the agency want to invest effort? And we call them our data action projects. And they're high value business needs, where some business areas have got to do some sort of regulatory monitoring or reporting, and they need to use their data better. Part of that is, putting it in a data platform and doing some BI and all that sort of good stuff. Great. The other part is then going, okay, well, let's take a look at your data. What have you written down about it? Nothing. What does it mean? Where do you put it? We do data management planning. And then we start going, okay, ideal. We haven't got beyond the D at ACMA yet. We've done 3 years worth of action projects. That's about 6 or 7. We're still in that I and D area. We haven't got to the scale of needing to sort of audit and harmonize, and there's some level of agreement just within the business areas that they're happy with that. But we've got the opportunity to keep building. So we're doing it very small, very lean. Everything we do at ACMA is lean because we have next to no people and very limited resources. So that's a small agency experience. I know some people are, Services Australia, 30,000 people. I can't speak to that, but Sam, I know you've worked with some bigger clients. How does it work for them?
I'd say, I'm going to just jump back 2 slides to keep this one up for everybody's context. We've seen it work with the smallest one because, again, this is designed to be pragmatic. Like, this is designed to be a toolkit for tempering enthusiasm, as well as a roadmap for how we do things. Like, we can do an inventory with 1 or 2 people and achieve a lot. Like, the idea is that we use this as a way to talk through what we can do. Like, 1 person in an organization of 30,000 isn't going to go through this multiple cycles. It's a very hard process. We have seen, I guess probably one other thing to talk through as well is MAST as a methodology is only about 2 or 3 months old. Like, it's only been very recently where we've really documented what we've done, and it's come out of an opportunity where Aristotle and ACMA through an internship with Heather, really worked through understanding why we did some of the things we did. So I won't say nobody's done this yet. And again, it's not something that people, oh, maybe we will do it in future, I don't know. We're using it as a kind of toolkit. But I've seen people scale through this, and our experience of guiding people through this takes them from like 1 or 2 people up to a couple hundred. But again, it's focusing on what we do at certain stages. We don't want to try and harmonize everything across the organization with 1 or 2 people. And this becomes the breaks where we go, no, we're going to stop. We're going to do each step. And when we're satisfied with the resources we've got, then we can proceed. Yeah, so that's where we're at. Are there any questions online?
No, but I've said if anybody has questions online, you can type it in the chat and I'll ask on your behalf, or you can raise your hand and then we can put you on to ask it yourself.
I guess just a clarification on your last answer, I found that really interesting. But so across ACMA, rather than working one business area or one motivated team through the full cycle, you're just doing multiple projects with multiple areas to do IM and D. And eventually you'll do the others at an organization level when everyone's on board?
When we are at a point where we can probably scale to the next things, because we have such a vast amount of data at ACMA with very different topics. You know, we regulate the communications and media industry. So that's everything from spectrum to news media bargaining, unsolicited communications. Like, we need people to just kind of almost harmonize amongst themselves before we even think about, you know, seeing the bigger picture of our organization. Our maturity is not there yet to start going, is there data from another area that's relevant to me? How do I understand the data? Can we harmonize our you know, definitions, the way we capture data? We are just not there yet. So it's part of our maturity that is also keeping us just at that very early stages of finding what we've got, investigating and documenting it, and then getting those areas to agree on. The long-term strategy is there to go broader than that. We've got to break down those cylinders of excellence and start getting people to, I know you love it. I know you love it.
I guess the broader question that I've got is about organizational structure and how it impacts it, right? Because when you've got one person, you don't need metadata, you wrote it, you know what it is, right? It's only when you, well, it's only when you want to share it, right, that you need to have that understanding. And often in bigger organizations, the people who are creating and capturing information are not the ones who want to use and exploit it. The people who you need their input for the metadata are not the ones who desperately want metadata and see value in it.
So that's why I'd say again, like, this is why, like, we made a manifesto. It sounds like we're just going to say that. That's why we made the manifesto. Like, that's what this is doing. Like, this is saying, like, we don't have to, like, we don't have to do anything tomorrow, but what we want to know is, can we get buy-in that these 4 principles are important? If we can't get past metadata is important and we know why, like, it's a hard task. And that's why we've, again, put that in place and said that manifesto is to say to the organization, these are the things that we believe are important. Like, we believe that metadata is important. We understand why, even if it's like, again, we know that there's effort that people will have to do to respond to data requests, and that's where metadata has value. We communicate that value back to them. The other thing that I'd say is, again, like, we only ever probably, like, in the first couple of instances, we'll get to E, especially with a lot of our clients, inventory, document, endorse, publish. Like, just get to that point. Just tell people what you've got. Tell people what you've got. It's only when you get a critical mass, and maybe you put a little question mark at the bottom of the wheel to say, when you've got a critical mass, once you've gone through that process a couple of times and you're starting to get to that point of confusion and going, we've got a few too many terms to manage, that's where we go, okay, now we've got a tool for this. Now we've got something in our toolkit that we can go, now we're ready to audit. Now we're ready to harmonize these things down.
But even if we don't get to the A, or we get a pause point around there because we're not ready, that leadership and long-term strategy is still really important. And in looking at the wheel, it's like, well, maybe leadership actually goes all the way around the whole thing. It's not the end point, but that's one of those things with leadership and strategy, right? It's where does it fit? Is it the beginning? Is it the middle? Is it the end? Is it all the way around? I don't know, but you need the leadership and the long-term strategy for this to work, not just at the end once you've done IDEA. And I think originally we did have IDEA, and then we're like, hang on a sec, you got to think the long term, we've got to think leadership, the strategy, which is how it became IDEAL. And, Sam said, this is still very new. We're still refining. We don't have all the answers. Give us some answers. You people do this for your day jobs too. Love your input. Teamwork.
The value of getting just the IND, we're seeing now with all the recent data breaches and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where people know where their data is, they know where their critical data assets, they understand what they're actually capturing, they know if they are managing appropriately.
One thing that we're building apart along with this, because again, we see this as a really important strategic piece for data management in general, is putting a basic maturity model and a basic set of value outcomes from this as well. Like if we worked with a client or if we worked with an organization that never went beyond I, that's still great. Like if you inventory every piece of data and just get a name, a definition, and a little bit about every single data asset, you're in a great position. Like you don't need to progress through everything. And that's the thing, is like if we only ever got buy-in to start with an inventory, we still got something successful. If we documented some of them, that's a great next step, and it shows us what we can do afterwards.
And for us government folk in the room, I'll bring it back to the foundational 4 data capabilities that the ONDC put out. This life cycle, rich metadata is not part of those foundational 4, and it's not even part of the inventory program. The foundational 4 are having your strategy, having your leadership, having your governance, and an asset discovery. That is about I. Your foundations sit on I and D. And the inventory pilot program helps to build and operationalize that as well. So if that's all you can achieve for your agency as a foundation, that's great.
We've got 5 questions.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions online, so I'll just go in order that they came through. Sure. I'll use the microphone. So the first question came through from Jamie. So I agree harmonization causes significant difficulties in organizations. Has there been much thought of building a business glossary which provides further context, e.g. finance and sales can use similar names for things with the different meanings. Adding some metadata to allow context helps to have the same term mean different things.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. And that's one we're looking at ACMA now. Finance just triggered that. We're doing some work with our HR data, and there's similar concepts that are tied into our finance systems as well. But finance says it's one thing, HR says it's another thing. Now, again, because of our maturity, we're at a point where it's like, well, you both just tell us what those means and we'll write that down, and that's great. And then for the HR work we're doing, we're just working on being really transparent about this is what the data means in this context. It's fit for this purpose. It means that. Don't try and compare it with finance. Finance has different meanings, and that's okay. So yeah, those business glossaries are really, really important, but it's okay to have, different meanings in the early stages.
Yeah, like again, like when we're talking about bringing 2 whole different business units on, we've got sales and marketing, as Jamie asked, like what is going to generate better value for us as an organization? Like, do we have a discussion, and do we try and get agreement that early on before we've got anything to work with? Or do we just document both? Like, it's not a problem, as again, there is a scalability of like issue over time, but it's not a problem for us to just document what people are giving us. And that's where, again, that problem that we've said with people is don't A too early. Like, don't audit and harmonize too early. Just focus on documenting what people are telling you. Like, don't try and improve it, just document it.
And be transparent about it.
Yeah. Like, and also it's okay. Like, it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
We're giving you permission. The MAST methodology, seriously, like again, like the value of this toolkit is to talk about a reason why. Like the whole principle of the MAST methodology is it's okay to document things multiple times if it gets us to that pragmatic outcome.
All right, I'll ask the second question that came through online from Chris. Other communities like the spatial community have been capturing metadata for some significant time. Have you linked up with that community?
I know quite a few spatial peeps, and they're part of my community that I talk to and debate this. And I've, had interesting metadata conversations this week with some geospatial people and the lack of, metadata associated with foundational infrastructure data files. But, I don't know, how many spatial people do you work with?
Not,
We welcome everybody. We're not
Yeah.
exclusive.
to be honest, not a lot. Again, and this is where I think that value of standards becomes important. Like, it's about picking the right standards for the right things. I won't say that we've engaged a lot with geospatial yet, but again, I think the principles will remain. Like, we just document things using the standards that are appropriate and help guide people to the frameworks and the tools and the systems they can use. So do you have any more geospatial stuff?
Sorry, Mr. Geospatial, whoever asked that question, I think your name was Chris. Love to have your insights on this as well, if you want to reach out to Sam or I, for sure. The more the merrier.
All right, I'll ask another question from Ian. You mentioned Excel as an interim tool. How do you publish the data usefully in a larger organization? Excel works as an easy collaboration tool, but it's not a great sharing tool.
No, it is not.
Well, do you have an answer? Because I've got an answer.
You go.
I've got an answer. Like, we've built tooling around this, and that's specifically why we've brought a certain lens to this as well, is again, building the systems and tools around this. Like, this is specifically what the Aristotle Metadata Registry is designed to do. And that's why we're so invested in this as an idea. Like, we're trying to maintain a hands-off approach in the sense that this is an important set of skills and this is an important framework, regardless of what tooling you can use. But we've invested significant amounts of effort across that DEA kind of focus. There are a lot of tools out there that will take you to the level of I very, very well. Data catalogs and data inventory systems can do that. But again, what we've focused on is building out everything else to really make sure that effort scales. There are probably other systems out there that I'm not going to tell you about. Applause and laugh. There are other systems out there, but again, what I would see this as is this is a critical set of skills. Like, we know that we're going to have this problem of endorsement. Do our systems support this? We know we're going to have this problem over time. If we follow this process, we will get to a point where there are lots of inconsistent terminologies. How do our systems support that? So view this as basically a checklist. What are the things we want and are important for us to document this?
And if I can just say, having a few very loud vocal tantrums about the ineffectiveness of Excel is a really good way of selling to your senior managers why you need something better. So, embrace Excel for what you can do with it, and then just let everyone know how painful it is when you're trying to scale.
So
just a comment, I'd like to state that this is an excellent way of articulating what I found is in my experience over the last 20 years. Trying to consume the elephant, basically. You've laid out bits that you hate. Yeah. It's very good.
Thank you.
So I kind of want to attach a bit onto how to sell the SES, but also for me, I've been in data governance space for 11-ish years, and I've always seen it as more of a culture piece than anything else. So I feel like this is really kind of going towards the culture piece, making it consumable. My question, and getting to my point, is how do we actually sell this to the SES? So I'm in an organization of 1,200 people. Up until probably 2 years ago, the data governance team was one person. It increased to 1.88 last year. Yay.
Nice work.
Now it's increased to about, I think, 2.5, and we're trying to make it, we need to make it bigger. But throughout the whole process, we have been trying to engage the SES and look to them. Data governance has always been the risk around, data breaches, not the risk of missed opportunity. I have started trying to change that shift in conversation. So any tips on how to help my fight?
Yeah, so I am wondering if my CDO is listening tonight, because he said he was going to, so sorry, Richard. If you don't like how I say this, I actually don't engage the entire SES cohort in the work that I do at ACMA. Working with the CDO and the CIO are kind of my key SES stakeholders for this kind of really technical stuff. I don't need to sell this to every other SES. They don't even know what metadata is, half of them. We know we're sending them to SES, skill data capability training, which is a really important part of them for their role as the SES. I kind of feel this is quite low level for them. But really important that your key SES stakeholders are on board with that. So that's kind of where I go. We're then using our interested SES through our Data Management Council, the ones involved in our action projects, to gently communicate that this is the approaches that we're taking. What do they think about that? Not so much asking their opinion, but more, is what we're intending to do going to impact on your people negatively or positively right now? And how can we mitigate those impacts on them so we're not the pesky people in the data governance teams? I hate being the pesky data governance person. So that's kind of how we're doing it. We're not so much asking permission for the whole agency. It's, working out amongst ourselves and then doing it slow and showing that value again and again.
I think it's interesting because I think all the SES want the benefits of good data governance.
Yes, they do.
Want automation, they want machine learning, they want, a new dashboard yesterday.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's really hard to be able to give them all the things they want without that data governance. And we do have an information and data committee which consists of most of the SES for my small agency. So might have a better chat.
Yeah, happy to chat a bit more.
Can I give some other pointers on that?
I will.
Cool. So I'd say again, like what you said there is like they know the M, like they want the metadata. They understand the need of this stuff. It's about building consensus across the rest. Like it's and again, I think the kind of talking to my friend at the back, whose name I didn't catch. Troy. Talking to Troy's point at the back, this isn't new, and that's really good to hear. Like, I think the thing that Heather and I have done around this is we've been talking about this problem for a long time. The best thing we did was give it a name. The second we gave it a name, we gave it something people could talk about. It wasn't just like do good, better data governance, like, which is what we've been talking about for a long time. It's like we gave it a methodology. Now all of a sudden there's something we can talk to. We gave it a framework, we gave it a name. And that's what we can use. We can say, well, we're not just doing some good stuff. We're following this methodology because we see value in it, right? The other thing that I'd say is, I forgot. Like we gave it a name and talk about it as a name. Like, I think that's the most important thing around this is, and the other thing is, sorry, I remembered I was just running through. The other thing is the reason why, like, it's important for us from an Aristotle perspective to talk about, yeah, we've got a solution for this, but that's a long-term goal. Part of the reason that we've put in everything in place around doing things tomorrow is we've said on the back of that sheet, there are things you can start doing tomorrow. Like, we don't need complex tooling for this. We don't need executive buy-in. We need Excel, and we need it, and we need to do it in a nice structured way. We tell about the rest of the agency, we're going to open Excel. We're going to do an inventory. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to write down what data exists. Nobody can stop you from starting this tomorrow. What we'll see is, again, what I've talked through is when we hit those points of scalability, when we hit those problems, that's when we can take this back to the executive and go, we did this process, we've followed this tooling, we've got these outcomes, we've got these problems. What are we going to do to solve the fact that we've been so successful?
I think I'll just finish that too. Like, it's really great to, talk to other people. I'm very happy to keep going and finish with you about this. Every agency is going to be a little bit different. And so you do have to tailor, and even this beautiful framework that we've got here, you're going to have to tailor it to your organization a little bit too. It's not a lift and shift, it's a land and expand.
Yeah.
All right, another question online from Angus. Is this a proprietary methodology owned and published by Aristotle?
TBD. I think we've trademarked the name because we're kind of invested in it. We are looking at ways to release some of this out to the community. We want this to be adopted because I see this to be personally important, and I think Heather sees this to be personally important to drive success. So however we release this will be done in a way that others can leverage as a tool they can use in their organizations.
And just so everyone knows, I'm actually not associated with Aristotle in any way other than knowing Sam. So I get no kickbacks from this either. This is kind of a shared passion project, proprietary stuff, TBD. But you know what? I love open source stuff. So, it's good to share. We'll work something out. But yeah.
I mean, Can I attribute?
Look, I'm gonna
You guys the kudos, but it's just, I think it's a beautiful.
give me, like, I'm sure we can have something sorted out by the end of drinks. Like, I'm not going to make that decision, and I'm not going to put people on the spot. But I think, yes, the key thing is we want this to be used because we see value. I mean, we see value in people being able to do this, and we don't want to hold that back from the rest of the community. So yeah.
I guess it said that often the value in publishing a methodology and sharing a methodology is the community that you build around it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And being able to have conversations about a similar approach to a shared problem.
Yeah.
Is there anything in that space or is?
Go.
So we actually are doing that kind of stuff. So we've developed a community forum of practice around the tooling. We're probably going to be expanding that to focus on the methodology as well. Like I've said throughout this isn't just about Aristotle. It really is just about good practice, and we're looking at ways to open that up. So again, we want to facilitate this communication because we see value in it.
We've also talked about that it's really important to try and quantify this methodology too in some sort of scientific, rigorous way, because that's what we like. And so that's something you have to think about too, is it's great to have the ideas in the community around them, but how can we show that it really is an effective way? And you need some sort of, quantifiable way or qualitative way of showing that too. Nothing wrong with qual. So yeah, we've got lots of ideas. Seb and I have more than enough ideas about this, not enough time.
Okay. Another question online from Chris. Do organizations really understand the dollar value of their data?
No. Resounding no from the audience.
I'm gonna use if you talk with me for more than 5 seconds, I'll drop the fact that I'm doing an MBA, which is really interesting, and I've learned a lot about corporate finance. And we talk about data as an asset, and I've started to learn, when you talk about finance, asset has a really clear meaning. Like it's talked about, liquidity, it's talked about disposal. I think we attached this word asset to data and then hoped that it would be managed like an asset. So no, I don't think we do that. I don't think we treat data as something that we can extract value from in a formal way. And I don't think I could answer that as part of this, but I think it is part of that communication. I think what I would say is if you're trying to communicate internally about the value of data, look at terminology from a finance perspective and say, how do we talk about like liquidity or value of an asset, and how do we translate that to data?
I've actually had a go at that. Looking at how much it costs to store, how much it costs in FTE, for example, to maintain it, keep the systems in place. You can start to get an idea of what that is, what it costs to then get rid of it, what it costs to secure it. You can start to unpack that. And then to get the message home to the SES is you say, well, this report that we do for you, if you couldn't get it tomorrow, well, what would be the cost to you, reputation, etc., if you can't get it?
That was what I was going to say too. Sometimes you don't realise the cost of your data until you don't have it.
Yeah,
Exactly. The cost of replacing it as well.
Yes.
or
Absolutely.
you don't realize the cost of your data until somebody else who shouldn't have it has it. And I think Optus and Medicare are giving everybody, Medibank, sorry, Optus and Medibank private proprietary limited. Optus and Medibank are giving everybody in the data community lots of really good anecdotes. So I don't want to say use that, but boy, how to use that, like it's going to be useful for conversation.
Changes proposed under the Privacy Act is significant balance.
Absolutely.
So.
And not to mention the cost for very expensive data scientists to clean data.
Yeah.
Just to prepare a report or something.
Yep.
There could be some class actions could set some precedents in terms of compensation.
I think we're about to see the value of data.
Yeah.
But then the cost starts to really help when you don't have this right.
Exactly.
All right, we have one more question online from Demeter. How do we implement the methodology as culture, which has 92.5% intact, very specific, versus just strategy, 7.5%, when it's not followed properly?
Read that one again, Lauren, please.
Maybe we
How
have-
do we implement the methodology as culture, which has 92.5% impact versus just strategy, which has a 7.5% impact when it's not followed properly?
You can go. I'll
Sure.
think on that some more.
I think like the best thing that we can do is like, again, we've tried to really compose this in a way that's non-scary, it's non-threatening, it's easy to digest. It's terms that we in the data community understand. The thing that I would say is use the name. Like we're going to be putting out, like, again, I think we were holding back publishing content until we got some peer review because we're scientists as well. We wanted to get that feedback first. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be putting more material out online because it sounds like this is resonating, which is great. And then I'd say the way to drive adoption is to just talk about it. Like Agile as a methodology got picked up because it had a name and people talked about things that they did. And we want to, like, for better or worse, Michael, it had a name and people did it. And that's why we put a name to it. Like, talk about this, tell people about it, show them the handouts. I'll make sure we've got an agreement by tomorrow. But show them that it's easy to do. Show them there are things that they can do. If people know they can do it, that's what drives culture. The question that I'd put back is to anybody to answer is, if your organization followed this from start to finish, cyclically, year on year over time, would your organization's data be better? And if so, do you think people will follow it?
While everyone's pondering that, I've thought of an answer now. Culture's really hard, and we all know that changing culture, changing behaviours, the hearts and minds is one of the hardest parts of this work that we do. As fabulous as this methodology and this framework is, it's not the silver bullet. Just like the DAMA wheel is not the silver bullet, Agile wasn't the silver bullet to developing good software. Foundational 4 is not the silver bullet for improving your data capabilities. You need to bring them all together. So there's no one thing that's going to fix the culture. And sometimes culture doesn't want to change. I'm just going to say it. Sometimes some places aren't ready to change, and that's okay. And you can only do so much in that. And don't feel like you're a failure if your organization isn't going to come to the party and you only ever get to the I with a couple of business areas. Years ago, when I was doing the data strategy for Geoscience Australia, I spoke to one of the SES there, and he said something to me that resonated with me for my entire career since then. He said, don't try and change this whole organization. Do not. If you can change 1/3 of this organization, you have succeeded. So don't think in terms of everyone. Think of a portion. And if you can change a portion, that's success. And that has, thank you, Graham Logan. You can send that back to him for people who know him. That's stuck with me because it's not about, you don't need to change everything. Even a small change, a little bit, can still be a success if you frame it in the right way.
I think that's an excellent point. So where I work, we're in our second data governance framework. The first data governance framework very much used the DAMA wheel.
Yep.
And it was a document for technical people. The new framework that we developed last year sends a message of data governance is for everyone's problem. Like everyone's problem, we all have responsibilities. We found with the first one, by just having it as a small section, it's an IT problem. Like data is an IT problem, which I don't agree with, but that's how it read. I noticed pockets of excellence, picked up parts of it, and then went all their different ways. And a big part of my role is to try and rein it back in a bit, because people are highly excitable. I'm a highly excitable person, so I was one of them. I was in HR at the time doing the data governance for there, so I went off and did my space. So I guess it's just, yeah, I think, addressing what you can is very important, but making sure it grows at the same way, not shoots off in different ways.
So audit and harmonize your agency, not just your terminology, and that long-term strategy of what you're trying to do. Absolutely.
I think that's, and to answer your question that you asked the room, would this work essentially? I think it would, for where I'm at. We've probably reached the I, the D, the E and we're at the A. And we're doing data inventories and all that stuff. And the stuff that keeps hitting the roadblock is around the leadership and long-term strategy. So I'm finding it very fascinating. And looking at the piece of paper with the pitfalls, I think I did bingo on every single one of them that we've done in the past.
I've done them too, so don't feel bad.
But naturally, we've actually been doing, so when I've taken over the role and changed it a bit, naturally, we've been doing stuff that makes sense. So I think, you know, what you said today, I mean, it makes sense to me. I think it makes sense to most people. But I had a bit of a chuckle about pitfalls. So.
And look, that's why they're the pitfalls. We've done them ourselves. We've seen them happen. We're not perfect. So, you know, it's good that we can go, yeah, actually, we can learn from that.
Yeah.
That's important too, learning from our mistakes, because we are going to make them as we're trying to change the culture of our organizations, change the behaviors, change what people are doing. We are going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Do you want to do like 2 more online? And...
So we don't have any more questions online. There's just a couple comments.
Okay.
So Jamie says that depends. That depends on the information systems and other processes that were being used and how well they were aligned. Now, process changes culture. And Inga says they're still unsure. I'd be concerned that after the easy wins with people who already value data, IDEAL may lose steam organizationally, but still provides a framework to continue technical metadata capture. Maybe Jamie also says maybe the I changes to identify data changes post implementation.
Yeah, like that's good feedback. I think I think you're right. I think my final bit would be, like, again, the pragmatic easy wins are great. I read a really great article about how winning drives culture. Like, those easy wins actually add up more than you think. Having a little success gives you like that little endorphin hit that drives you to want to do a little bit more. And across the organization, it does add up. We've seen this be a slow process at most of our organizations, and I won't say that we've done this perfectly. Again, it's only very recently that we've put, you know, words and ideas around how we've done processes with our clients. But I think you'd be surprised how quickly those wins add up. The other thing is that, you know, if you double your workforce every 6 months of people who are focusing on data, like, it's 1, and then 2 people will be doing it 6 months later. And then by the end of the year, you'll have 4, which doesn't feel like a big number. But again, that 8 becomes 16, like that iterative growth of, you know, sharing it across the organization and going, look, have you seen this one? You have a look at it. And then giving people the ability to kind of share this across the organization, it adds up really quickly. And then once people see success, they want to be successful too. Yeah, so I'd say don't think the quick wins don't continue to identify themselves, and don't think that they don't add value early on. And that's why we say, you know, even focusing on those little wins early adds value back.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So if anybody in the room has a question, or if anyone online has another question, we have time for one more, and then we'll wrap up the meeting.
I have a question. All right. If we could tell people, like, what is the one thing that we want them to get out of this? Like, what is your one, or like, what if there was one thing that you could repeat to everybody today out of everything that we've done and everything we talked about? What do you think is the most important bit?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
It's talking to you. Like, there's only me here. Like, I wouldn't ask me a question.
Well, you both of us are really bad at eye contact with your introverts. So it's like,
Okay.
you've got to be talking to everyone
You.
on the floor.
So, you, Heather, what do you think is the most important?
I can't pick one because I never can do as I'm told with these things. So I think it's really important to just start somewhere and write it down. And leadership and long-term strategy. Start somewhere, write it down, but think long-term still. You've got to have that balance of just doing a little bit now, but thinking that, I'm sorry for everyone who can't see me prancing around up here, but thinking way down the track, where do you want to go as well? Sorry, failed, didn't just do one.
Do you want to ask me the
Oh,
question?
Sam.
You ask me the question, and then we can wrap up.
What a team we are.
We practice this.
Sam, if there's one takeaway for everybody here tonight, what would it be from you?
That's a really insightful question, Heather. Thank you. I'd say pragmatism. Like, again, like, part of the reason why I've suggested putting this in place is because we get lost in these big, massive, grand projects, and the successes that I've seen happen come from little wins. Like, focusing on doing little bits at a time adds up, and it means that we get that addiction to success. So be pragmatic. Don't focus on the entire organization. Focus on the one business area that's going to work with you. Like, and then focus on the next business area that's going to work with you, and then the next one. And over time, you will see these big iterative wins that will demonstrate why data is important to all of us. So yeah, thank you for that question.
My pleasure.
Cool. Are we done? Can we
All
go?
right, yeah. So I guess we'll wrap up now. Everybody online and in the room, thank you for your questions and comments throughout the presentation. And I'd like to thank Heather and Sam for presenting MAST methodology and the IDEAL framework to us. Yeah, thank you. We'll be, hold on. Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Somebody online. So we'll be ending the Zoom meeting, and then everybody who's in person will be doing networking and drinks and canapes. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Sam and Heather.
You're welcome.
Good.